One of the big things that people find confusing is understanding crochet hook sizing. Now, for regular crochet hooks, not the tiny steel ones, but just your standard crochet hooks, you've got this throat right here that leads into the shank. And this shank is what determines the size of the crochet hook. So you can see this shank here is larger than this shank here. And this crochet hook, the shank is even larger than these other two. So there are several different ways that we use to describe and size crochet hooks. And this chart shows some examples of crochet hook sizes. Now the first way you'll see people describe crochet hooks is by the millimeter size, and millimeter sizing comes from the diameter of the shank of the crochet hook. So that's what's determining the millimeter size. And this is the common way you'll see crochet hooks described in England, throughout the UK, and Japan, various other countries. So you might start with a tiny 2.25 millimeter hook. Once you're working with worsted weight yarn, you're probably using a 5 millimeter or 6 millimeter hook, and they can get larger and larger and larger. In the US, we use an additional size designation of a letter and a number. So I might have a B1 hook that happens to be 2.25 millimeters. A C is going to be larger than a B. A D is larger than a C. An E is larger than a D. An F is larger than an E. And basically kind of down and down you go. This hook right here is labeled an F 3.75 millimeters. So I might say I'm using an F5 hook or a 3.75 millimeter hook. Now, if I use this 3.75 millimeter hook, I'm going to crochet just slightly differently than if I'm using, say, a wooden 3.75 millimeter hook. So that's why it's really important to stick with the same crochet hook throughout your project, because there are going to be slight differences even between two companies that state the same millimeter sizing. Now, a very popular hook size is the H, which is a 5 millimeter. It's often called the H8. Now, a G6 is a 4 millimeter. Sometimes you'll see G hooks that are 4.25 millimeters. So that's why I always say, don't just look at the letter, look at the millimeter. So you know if you're using a 4 millimeter or a 4.25 millimeter. G is 6, H is 8, and in between we have this number 7. And a 7 hook is a 4.5 millimeter hook. Because there's no letter between G and H to go with it, sometimes you'll see a 4.5 millimeter hook labeled as a 7. Sometimes you'll see it labeled as a G. So really the millimeter sizing is the most accurate way of figuring out the size of the hook you're using. I9, J10, K is called a 10.5, 6.5 millimeters. But basically what you can remember is as you go down the alphabet, the hook size gets larger. As you go down the numbers, B1, C2, G6, J10, the hook gets larger. And the millimeter sizing is going to be your most accurate way to make sure that you're using the same size hook that's called for in a pattern or that you want to try using.